Throughout our 120 years, Ford has supported our nation's armed forces and honored their selfless service to our country. The Central Ohio Ford dealers are proud to continue this tradition by investing in the work of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus. Together, we want to share the veterans' heroic stories and introduce a grateful nation to the faces behind our forces. Please join us monthly to hear inspiring educational stories from our veterans who have gone above and beyond their call to defend freedom around the world. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum and your Central Ohio Ford dealers. Together, we will never forget.
Welcome to NVMM's Inspiring Stories of Service for July. This month, we are reflecting on duty, service, and freedom. We had the honor of sitting down with U.S. Navy veteran Captain Charlie Plumb and U.S. Air Force veteran Colonel Tom Moe. They speak of their time as prisoners of war in Vietnam and their life of service and sacrifice.
I'm Captain Charlie Plumb. I was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 2,103 days.
Hi, Tom Moe, Colonel USAF. I was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for 5 years and 2 months.
I flew 74 missions before I was shot down on my 75th. I had 5 days before the end of my cruise and my tour of duty in Vietnam.
So I flew 85 total missions, 60 missions over North Vietnam, virtually all of them air to ground, some CAP missions. And so 85 takeoffs, 84 landings.
I had actually been to Vietnam before. The aircraft carrier, of course, was operating on Yankee Station and Dixie Station. But if we had a hung bomb or had some need to go into the land base, well, I had a hung bomb, and the procedure was not to take it back aboard the aircraft carrier because you're going to blow up your home if you took a hung bomb. A hung bomb is when you can't get off the rack. You pickle it and it doesn't go. So you don't know when it's going to release. So the procedure was to go into Da Nang, and of course the Air Force and the Marine Corps was flying Air Force out of there. I'm a wet behind the ears, brand new pilot, but I knew all the frequencies and stuff. So I flew my F-4 in there, and the Marines said, "Come on in, we'll take that bomb off and have you on your way. Don't even shut the airplane down," and because we're quick. And so I rolled into the pits, and there were about 15 Marines came under my you know how this is going to end, right? and I think it only takes 2 or 3 sailors to take a bomb off an airplane. I got 15 Marines banging around under there. And this sergeant comes out with a big old grin and said, "You're on your way." I took off. My backseater said, "This plane feels pretty light." They'd taken the bomb off. They'd taken every rack. They'd taken the fuel stores. They'd taken antennas, everything but the paint.
Scavenged for parts.
Exactly.
So we finished pilot training, got our wings, went to fighter training, got certified in the F-4, and boom, 23 years old, I jumped on an airplane, charter, for Vietnam. So the first time I experienced Vietnam on the ground was I came over on a charter airplane from the States, landed in Saigon, and then hitchhiked up to Da Nang on a C-130. Landed there in the middle of the night, found a temporary quarters. I climbed up on the top bunk, and somebody looked up at me and they said, "Sonny, you better get off that thing. If we're hit by a rocket attack, you're going to be the first to get hit." So I thought, all right, so welcome to the war.
I was a Navy pilot, and we worked with the Air Force, but our missions were primarily separate in North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and I flew 74 combat missions.
So I was an Air Force pilot, fresh out of pilot training and fighter school. So, boy, I was wet behind the ears for sure. And I flew 85 missions, most of them in the southern part of North Vietnam. And as Charlie noted, the pieces of Vietnam were divided up basically between the Navy and the Air Force, and we stuck to our areas.
In my squadron, half of the time we were playing fighter, half of the time we were playing attack. What that meant was for 2 weeks of a line period, we would arm ourselves with missiles, air-to-air missiles, and go out and protect the bomb group. Or we had to combat air patrol with missiles. The other 2 weeks of our line period, we would carry bombs around. So a typical mission, and sometimes we'd fly 2, maybe even 3 missions a day. We would launch off the aircraft carriers, go into the targets, and either circle the targets looking for enemy MiGs if we were fighters, or drop bombs and rockets on the targets if we were playing the attack role.
So it's interesting to discuss the type of missions that we flew and that the Navy flew, because we have different jargon just for the kind of missions. So I noticed that Charlie was referring to attack and fighter missions, which I would say were equivalent to attack would be air to ground and fighter would be air to air, which is how we generally referred to them. But we also flew both. We were assigned a role, so most of my missions were air to ground. We did a few CAP missions, combat air patrol. Never saw an enemy airplane, and it wasn't our primary mission anyhow. We flew generally CAP missions when we were helping a downed pilot, and then we were ready to take on an enemy air. So air to ground, 85 missions, mostly southern part of North Vietnam, and of course, the place where nobody ever flew was Laos. We flew a lot of missions in Laos as well.
I think we flew as fighter pilots in Vietnam, never thinking that we'd ever be shot down. You can't fly into enemy territory assuming they're going to be shot down. It'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so we were the peacocks, you know. We were the pretty proud guys.
Yeah,
and
gotta be.
It gotta be. And so being blown out of the sky was not our choice. And to surrender to the enemy was not on the playbook. You know, that's not what fighter pilots do. We're not trained to give up. So it was quite a transition for us. And I think to a man, we felt somewhat guilty about failing in our mission, because we did not accomplish our mission. We didn't come home. And that was a big mind screw, you know, for us. It was something that was sort of hard to get past until we found out that everybody else felt the same way, and that there wasn't a man there who was as strong as he wanted to be. And when we figured that out, it was a great comfort, at least to me.
It was.
To know that we were all together, and yes, we hadn't been as strong as we wanted to be, but oh, by the way, we're still in the fight. We are still warriors, and we are still expected to fight this war, which we did.
We brought the war to the prison cell. Being shot down was, of course, a dramatic experience. It was really wonderful to survive it. But my particular downing was due to a weapon malfunction. We had a faulty bomb fuse, and we knew about it. In November alone, 1 week, we killed 13 pilots for detonating bombs. Without going into great detail, the mission I went down on had been after a few weeks where we had demanded the bomb fuse be examined. And we were assured after this period that it was fine, but we just didn't believe the engineers at all. And so we tried to fly in a way that when we released our bombs, we would get away from them as much as possible. And that's what we did, but it wasn't enough. My wingman's bomb went off, blew him in half. They miraculously ejected and were rescued, actually. And after a few minutes, my engines were on fire, lost hydraulics, went into an upside-down spin. And so I was able to maneuver the airplane using some pilot training tricks. With no hydraulics, full aft stick and full rudder, the airplane rolled erect, and the two of us were able to eject. So that in itself was a very interesting few moments at 25,000 feet. And I went out very high, so I had plenty of time to think about it. But as I broke through the clouds, I was near a AAA site. And so the troops at the AAA site started shooting at me, all the way down to the tree. I landed in a tree, about 20 feet above the ground, and had to use a nylon cord that was in our harness to get out of the tree.
Interesting how similar our stories are, because we've never really actually talked about this. But my F4 lost the hydraulic pressure, lost everything, rolled upright, then upside down. But I was much lower. So to eject from 4,000 feet, your parachute doesn't have time to deploy from 4,000 feet. So I had to roll the airplane upright. Stick was frozen, lost my hydraulic. In a Phantom, the only manual control you have is a rudder. It's hydraulically boosted, but you get some force with the rudder. And so I hit the rudder and rolled back upright while I ejected.
Both how we got out. That's interesting.
That's true.
Charlie.
The fact that also they were shooting at me as I'm coming down in my parachute as well. Now, I was luckier than you because I was very close to Hanoi. So I wasn't in the jungle at all. I was in a rice paddy. And they captured me immediately. And it was a short trip to the Hanoi Hilton. Being a prisoner of war, of course, was no easy task, for sure. And I hadn't really signed up for that. But once I got into it, I found that there were several things that I could do to maintain my health and my mental capacity there. But it was very important that we keep busy. And so we did sit-ups and isometrics and running in place to keep our body busy. And ironically, we stayed fairly healthy while we were there on a diet of maybe 1,000 calories a day. 2 bowls of rice and maybe a little broth was really how we survived. But it was pretty much unpolished rice, so it was healthier than the rice we have today. Physically, even though I was bleeding from 4 open wounds when I was shot down and no medical care, but the wounds healed, and occasionally we would have a fairly serious problem, a physical problem, and we found out that you just kind of live through this stuff. Psychologically, I think was even a bigger problem than our physical survival. And I don't think I'd be alive today if it hadn't been the fact that we could communicate with each other. It was just absolutely vital that we connect. And we did so by secret codes, tugging on wires and tapping on walls, and we got very creative with the codes that we used. But it was essential that we contact the other guys. We had great leadership in the prison camps, and our leaders told us to continue to talk to each other because we're all in this together.
So being a POW is certainly a unique experience, but none of us entered into that without an extensive amount of training. So we didn't want to do it. We were hoping it wouldn't happen. Didn't dwell on it a lot, but when it happened, we were ready. And Charlie mentioned the great leadership we had, which is so vital to just, we're all in this together and passing the word back and forth. But I believe just as important was our training. Because when I was captured, traveled for several months to Hanoi, I was put in not only in solitary confinement, but isolation for 9 months. 9 months. And I found when I finally got a roommate that, not to my surprise, nor about his performance, is we all did the same. So that training worked. We were trusted to be on our own in enemy territory, and we upheld our honor, and we got through that because of our training. And then the leadership helped us develop themes that were important. Return with honor, for example, and things like that, which are very, very useful in sort of focusing the things that we believed in already. And so the preparation, the training, and the leadership came together. But what really I was not prepared for was the isolation for 9 months. We're gregarious beings. We like to be around people. And so for 9 months, the only time I had interface with somebody, they beat me up, or worse. You almost got comfortable being in a prison cell because when you're in there, they couldn't touch you. And when the door opened, the sound of those keys jingling, would just send shivers through your back because you didn't know what was coming, except that it was going to be bad. So 9 months of that, your only interface is bad with other people. And so I used my faith. I prayed. I used all the lessons I had learned in my church growing up. But you start to withdraw, I did at least, into your mind so much that you're almost losing touch with reality, especially when you're being tortured. I could look down on myself while I was being tortured, so I didn't hurt anymore. That thing down there was not me. And a couple times I didn't know if I was going to make it back. I'm not talking about make it back alive, make it back into the real world. Mm-hmm. And so then you had to work on that. And then fortunately, after 9 months, I got a roommate, Myron Donald, saved my life later after a horrible torture event. And but it was so wonderful to see somebody in person and talk to them. I never would have expected the problem of being isolated. Not just alone, but isolated. Nobody to tap to, nobody to talk to through the wall or anything. 9 months. That was tough.
Some of the camps had no electricity, and so it was really dark. And if you were alone in solitary confinement and isolated, you'd really wonder if you were alive or dead. There was nothing to prove to you that you're actually a living being. The simple tugging on a wire and have somebody tug back, or tap on the wall, shaving a haircut, somebody comes back 6 bits, and you know that something you're doing physically, it is connected to somebody else. And they come back, and suddenly you know that you are alive. And not only that, but somebody cares enough to risk their life to communicate with you. And so it becomes a very close bond, even though sometimes, we couldn't see the other guys, we didn't know who they were, but just a connection itself was a very comforting feeling.
I think most of us, if not all of us, were optimistic. We were going to go home. Our country was going to bring us home. And that was demonstrated, actually, when the President Nixon authorized a raid on one of the camps. Turned out the camp was empty, and that's a very long, interesting story. But it was proof put in the pudding. We're going home. We never doubted it. And here is these troops risk their lives to come in and try to rescue us. And we had been up in a camp near China. I think, Charlie, you were up there as well. So they moved us down to Hanoi, and so we thought something was up. And then the propaganda radio would vary in its message from day to day, like what we're called criminals, the blackest of criminals, are never going home. So we figured the more they said that, the closer we were to going home. And but to me, the big sign, because I'm such a clever guy, was one day they let us out in the yard and a C-141 flew over. And sharp as I am, I said, that is a good sign. It was one of the, it may have been yours, Charlie.
Might have been. Well, we had a code of conduct which said we don't accept early release. We will be released after the sick and injured and enlisted guys, and then pilots by longevity. The guys who were shot down first and were there the longest got to go home first. And so we refused to go. And they said almost call us an international incident because, the people were there, the plane was there to take us home. And so they finally showed us a list of the first plane load of guys, sick and injured guys. And so now it was our turn. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. They were all lined up, ready for us. We went to the hospital, and the dietitians at the hospital assumed that we couldn't digest normal food. So the first offering when I got there was Gerber baby food. It was mashed up rice. And we said, I want a big greasy cheeseburger and a mug of beer, please. And so, but they were very good to us when we came home.
I talked about prayer a lot. I still pray a lot to this day. But I was determined I was going to come home and see my family, my wife, my little girl, my parents. I was determined to do that. And part of that determination was because I was going to lick these people at their game. I was going to win, even if I perished. And I came close a few times to not making it. But even then, as I didn't think I was going to make it through the day, I said, well, I'm going home to God. And so I was going to survive. And then there were techniques to survive, and they may be different from day to day.
Our faith was vital to really believe in our country, in each other, in our God, that there was a plan. That we might never understand the plan, but there had to be some kind of a direction that we were going, a purpose that we had. And the big aha moment is when you decide that I can't change the things around me, but I can certainly change the way I think and act about the things around me. And so I still have control. I am still the master of my fate, the captain of my soul. And that was the big lesson, I think, that we all learned. Well, to begin with, I think we've spent the last 50 years applying a lot of the lessons that we learned in the prison camp, because it was certainly a life-changing opportunity for all of us, if you want to call it an opportunity, because it truly was. I think that I learned more in the nearly 6 years I was in a prison camp than I would have, getting a PhD in something, because. And so I continue to try to live my life today, 50 years later, depending on things that I learned in that time that I was in the prison. What do we have to say, to other people that go through challenges? Because I believe that the challenges we faced over there are a lot of the same challenges that everybody faces in everyday life. There's not a person in the country that didn't feel a bit put on and isolated during COVID. Not a person here who hasn't gone through a challenge of a divorce or a loss of a child. These are the kinds of challenges that adversity that I see that you can actually take advantage of. And I think that we did the same thing. The adversity that we faced there, we leverage, I think, with the knowledge that within every adversity in life, there's some kind of an opportunity. There's something to be done. And if you apply the basics and take it a day at a time and think positive thoughts, you can, in fact, emerge from the challenge as we did and be better off than had we not been through the challenge.
I guess there's an old expression, what doesn't kill you makes you a better person, It's hard to believe we're looking back now, 50 years. It's gone just like a blink. But part of the reason I think it went by a blink is because we moved forward.
Yep, 50 years later. We're still hanging in there.
Thank you for watching July's Inspiring Stories of Service. To see more of our stories, visit our website at nationalvmm.org. And a special thank you to Captain Charlie Plumb and Colonel Tom Moe for their inspirational stories of service and sacrifice.
Throughout our 120 years, Ford has supported our nation's armed forces and honored their selfless service to our country. The Central Ohio Ford dealers are proud to continue this tradition by investing in the work of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum in Columbus. Together, we want to share the veterans' heroic stories and introduce a grateful nation to the faces behind our forces. Please join us monthly to hear inspiring educational stories from our veterans who have gone above and beyond their call to defend freedom around the world. The National Veterans Memorial and Museum and your Central Ohio Ford dealers. Together, we will never forget.